Today's video is sponsored by Delete Me. When we look up at the night sky with the unaided eye, we see stars that are up to 1,000 light years away, depending upon their brightness. We also see objects which are much closer, in our celestial backyard, so to speak, which only reflect the light from the sun, like the moon and the planets out to Saturn. Beyond this, we need increasingly powerful telescopes to see the outer planets, Uranus and Neptune, and what for a time was planet Pluto, now dwarf planet. But with increasingly powerful telescopes both here on Earth and in space, as well as space probes, and looking at the orbits of the planets and comets, we've found that our solar system is actually much bigger than we thought, but just how big may surprise you. For thousands of years, we've looked up at the night skies and seen the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, and thought that was pretty much the extent of what it was, although back then we didn't know that Jupiter and Saturn were much bigger, but much farther away. We also used to think that the Earth was the centre of the universe and everything revolved around it, including the sun, but these ideas were overturned with scientific observation and reasoning. And it was with this reasoning and the growing use of mathematics, our understanding of gravity and celestial mechanics, that would suggest that there was much more out there than met the eye. With the creation of a telescope, the planet Uranus was discovered in 1781, and then a new planet was proposed and eventually discovered in 1846 using the mathematical calculations to predict its position due to the perturbations seen in the orbit of Uranus. That planet was Neptune, and with this new discovery, the size of our solar system, as in the distance from the Sun to the new last planet, Neptune, had grown considerably. We had now moved from discovering objects through just vision alone to that of prediction using mathematical calculations. Then, in 1902, Percival Lowell suggested there could be a ninth planet after observing the relationship between the orbits of the planets, meteor showers, as well as with comets. In 1910, Lowell started his search for this elusive new planet, and in 1911 he purchased a blink comparator, a specialized stereoscopic microscope that held two photographic plates side by side, and with a mechanical shutter that allowed the observer to alternate between the two images and highlight any differences between them, such as a very dim planet passing across the field of view. Although Lowell was unsuccessful, 19 years later, on February 18, 1930, Clyde Tombaugh was using the same blink comparator and photographic plates from a 13-inch, 24-inch and 42-inch telescopes, discovered what we now know as Pluto, which became the ninth planet. However, in 2006, the International Astronomical Union demoted Pluto from a planet to a dwarf planet because it could not meet one of the three criteria required for an object to be classed as a planet. These were in that it had to orbit the Sun, which it did. It had to be spherical, which it was, and it must be big enough to clear its own orbit, which, as it's located in the Kuiper belt, which is filled with other objects, and several of them are of a similar size, it did not. Knowing what data companies hold about you is a bit like trying to see what's at the edge of the solar system, in that it's hidden in darkness and vastly bigger than you thought. But what happens to the data you give out when you buy, subscribe, or just go about your everyday internet browsing? The big internet companies make billions running real-time, personalized ad auctions using data supplied by data brokers, companies that buy and sell data to anyone that wants it. Data can include emails, names, current and past addresses, phone numbers, age, occupation, passport numbers and photos, driving license info, and more. Because anyone can buy this data, if your job is in places like the government, the military, civil services, or you have a high profile, it can be a security risk. You can request these companies delete the data they hold on you, but with over 750 data brokers around the world, all buying and selling personal data, where do you start? And this is where Delete Me comes in. Delete Me has been helping normal people like you and I get their personal information removed from data brokers since 2010 in the US, UK and Europe. Delete Me is simple to use. You just select the plan you want, fill in the online application, and Delete Me will contact hundreds of data brokers to remove you from their list. You receive regular privacy reports that show how much data was found, where it was found, and where it was removed from. You can do this for yourself or your family, and if you use the joindeleteme.com/droid link in the description below, or you scan the QR code next to me today, you'll get a 20% discount. So if you value your privacy, I reckon you should check them out. Something else which suggested that the solar system was actually much bigger than first anticipated was the work done to identify comets which came through the solar system at regular periods and then disappeared back into space. It was realized that if these objects kept returning years or even decades later, they must be on a very large orbit and therefore part of the solar system. But where did they come from? In 1755, Immanuel Kant, a German natural philosopher, suggested that the Sun and the planets were formed from an extensive and diffuse nebula, and that comets must also have come from the same material. This was later expanded upon by the French scientist Pierre-Simon Laplace in 1805, when he published his Celestial Mechanics. However, he could not explain the highly eccentric orbits of the comets, nor the almost random directions in which they appear to come in from the sky, and suggested that they may come from outside of our solar system. But by the second half of the 19th century, astronomers discovered that the Sun and the entire solar system moves through space within the Milky Way galaxy. If that was so, and if comets were interstellar objects and not from the solar system, then we would see more of these coming from the direction of the Sun's travel through interstellar space, which we did not. It was the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli that suggested that comets come from a uniform cloud that surrounds the Sun, but at a much farther distance, but was still part of the solar system. With the discovery of periodic comets, like the famous Halley's Comet, it was proven that comets were indeed just like planets on an orbit around the Sun, although they were huge and highly elliptical, rather than the mostly circular ones around the planets. By observing their movements and using Newton's laws, their orbits could be calculated to work out where they may have come from. But it would take until 1950 when the Dutch astronomer Johannes Oort suggested that the solar system is surrounded by a huge cloud of material extending over 1,000 times farther out than the orbits of Neptune and Pluto. This will be made up of material that came from the original primordial nebula from which the Sun and the planets formed, something which Immanuel Kant had theorized 195 years earlier. Oort demonstrated that as the Sun moves around the galaxy, stars passing near the outer boundary of this cloud might perturb some of these would-be comets just enough to alter their orbits and send them into the inner solar system. Here the Sun's heat would melt the ice in the comet's nuclei, creating the tails that give them their distinctive appearance. In 1951, another Dutch astronomer, Gerard Kuiper, suggested that most of the short-period comets were located in an area which started just beyond the orbit of Neptune, which was later called the Kuiper Belt, and was first observed in 1992 and included the now dwarf planet Pluto and many other dwarf planets and planetoids which are still to be discovered. The size of the Oort cloud, although it's never actually been observed because it's so far away and the objects are too small and dark to be seen by even the most powerful telescopes we have, is now thought to extend up to about 1.5 light years from the Sun, in what's called the Hill's sphere or sphere of influence, but it could go up to possibly 3 light years. This is where the influence of the Sun's gravity is still stronger than that of the next largest body, namely other nearby stars. The nearest star, Proxima Centauri, a red dwarf which is part of a triple star system, Alpha Centauri, and is 4.25 light years away, but is only 12.5% the mass of the Sun, so its sphere of influence is a lot smaller, but its nearby companions are Sun-like stars and of similar masses, so even though they're a bit farther away, it would greatly increase their sphere of influence. To To put this size into perspective with Voyager 1, the only man-made object to go beyond the heliopause, where the pressure of the solar wind is equal to the pressure of the interstellar wind, it will take 300 years for Voyager 1 to reach the start of the Oort cloud, and then another 30,000 years for it to cross it and exit its far side, meaning that our solar system is probably between 2 and 4 light years in diameter. This would mean that our solar system is between 10 and 20,000 times bigger than the orbit of Saturn, which was thought for hundreds if not thousands of years to be the limit of our own backyard. Who knows what we might find in the future as we look to explore this last part of our solar system. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and a big thanks go to our patrons for their ongoing support.